Hi, I'm Kevin Werbach, professor of legal studies and business ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies, from broadband to blockchain. Today, AI is promising to transform our world. But AI needs accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's developed and deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. My guest is Rumman Chowdhury, for many years one of the most influential voices working in responsible AI. She co-founded Humane Intelligence, a nonprofit that pioneered community-driven evaluations and red teaming of AI models, where she served as CEO before stepping down to focus on a new public benefit corporation, bringing forward this AI evaluation work. She previously served as Director of Machine Learning, Ethics, Transparency, and Accountability at Twitter, founder of Parity, an algorithmic auditing platform, and global lead for responsible AI at Accenture. Our conversation ranges from the specifics of AI assessments and governance processes in organizations to broader questions about AI's impact on jobs and education, and ultimately why we need to reframe our perspective on thinking itself. I enjoyed speaking with Rumman, and I'm sure you'll enjoy listening. Rumman, thanks so much for joining me on the road to accountable AI.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
You were really one of the pioneers of this field of responsible AI, and obviously a lot has changed since those early days. We're in a period right now where there's been a lot of pushback and pullback from some of the at least regulatory activities around AI. Just in general, how do you see the environment that we're in right now in terms of these issues?
Yeah, I'm glad you're framing it as a push-pull. I think the maybe superficial narrative is we are in an era of pure AI acceleration and everyone's just all in all the time. But if you scratch beneath the surface, you do see actually a lot of very sensible regulations, standards, groups, and bodies being set up that are trending in a really positive direction. When I say positive direction, to me, that means very applied, as in like how can we implement reasonable audits? How do we create good governance? How do we set standards that we can adhere to? And then how do we start giving some teeth around all of these things? And I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that, yeah, it's happening in the US as well as in other parts of the world. So what I'm not talking about right now is necessarily the EU AI Act, but actually, things that I'm working on that we're seeing in the United States as well.
What are you seeing in the United States?
Yeah, so there's a few things. One is I'm part of an AI assurance industry trade group that was established by this group called Fathom, as well as some others. Independent verification organizations, IVOs. There's a legislation that just passed in Virginia. So what that would be is like what I've been advocating for, I don't know, 10 years at this point. Sometimes I forget that I've been in this field for 10 years, but I would say probably the first time I testified to Congress calling for independent bodies, and that actually has a very specific meaning, was probably about, it was pre-COVID, it's like 5 years ago at this point. Now we are actually seeing Virginia as the first state passing the need for an IBO, which is an independent body. Now, my colleague, Dr. Gabriela Waters, who runs the Virginia State University Center for Responsible AI, is actually tasked by their Joint Commission on Technology to put some structure around that. They can claim things on what does that look like? What is the feasibility? What is the responsibility? Also, importantly, where does the liability lie when you find issues?
Is it realistic to rely on these private sector or public-private types of governance mechanisms without having mandates?
Well, in my view, it would be a mandate. That's what I think is so appealing about it to so many people. I think you're right to sound a bit skeptical. We've had voluntary commitments and all sorts of
Mhm.
nice glossy media moments for quite some time now. And I think we are very much past the point of that. I do think that, we do need standards, we do need some guidance, but at the same time, the work of people like us will never really be done, right? When a standard
Mhm.
is set, that means the water level is higher, and then our work moves up higher from that, right? Like most of us are now in the business of compliance.
Mhm.
Compliance then becomes the job of legal teams and the associated technical parties working with legal teams. For people working on responsible AI, AI safety, et cetera, then the bar just gets lifted, right? Then now we can think of the next stage of big problems and issues to deal with. All that is to say, we will not magically go from a world of zero regulation to a world of perfect regulation. We will go from a world of zero regulation to some regulation, some standards, some norms, some public pressure, a wide range of things. And our job is to uplift all of them.
Mhm. And I guess part of why I'm asking these questions is just trying to get your sense of the environment, because there is that pressure to go fast, and some of it is just the acceleration is, but some of it is companies
Mhm,
saying, this is we see as an imperative. In that kind of environment, how do people like you and others make the case to need to
mhm.
focus on these issues?
But I'm glad you're bringing up industry because I see industry kind of in two parts, right? There's the tech industry, frontier
Mhm,
model companies for whom exactly it's AI at all costs, and
mhm,
there's kind of some language around safety. It's usually very much indexed on catastrophic risk and little else, while we're seeing explicitly these companies funding anti-regulation movements,
mhm,
all around the U.S. On the other end, a lot of the companies I work with are actually not AI native companies. They're companies that are giants in their own
mhm,
industry, and it could be retail, auto manufacturing, insurance, finance. They're all interested in AI, but the way I put it is, it's not their baby, so you can say it's ugly. You're not challenging their core product if you say you should do this differently, or
mhm,
you need better governance, and actually they're seeking it. So with most of the companies that I work with today, what we see is that they've spent the last few years building out some sort of an AI governance or oversight body. That body is usually consists of widely like 6 to 8 people, ranging from senior leadership and everything from like legal to product,
mhm,
AI, cybersecurity. The new one I'm seeing is there's a lot more HR in the room because
mhm,
of so much AI being
mhm,
used in the workplace. That being said, that what that group has been doing is reviewing every internal AI implementation one at a time. And while it is very loved in the organization, everybody feels comfortable with that modality, right? They feel that they're getting the input they need, they're improving their products. It's just not sustainable or scalable. So the tension that I'm helping companies navigate is we love this system that we have. We've been governing AI and we're happy with it, but it's not going to work for a world in which we want to have hundreds of AI
mhm,
systems. It's not answering the questions of third party procurement and liability, especially
mhm,
as we start to see a little bit more shape around these laws. And importantly, we don't know what to do with agentic systems. So
mhm.
it's a completely different creature. So for them, they want to scale, but they want to scale their governance as well.
And what are you telling them about how to do that?
Well, I'm specifically working on some products and tooling. So it's Human Intelligence Public Benefit Corporation. So two things. One is specifically it's a public benefit corporation
Mhm,
because I do see our mission while being a fork to, to serve individuals and organizations that want to see AI being used better in the real world. And second is one thing I'm working on is developing like a modular tooling environment.
mhm,
So it's an orchestration environment that has a wide library of things that people can use. Think of it more as like a GitHub or a Hugging Face environment. So it's not like a SaaS platform. Interestingly, like yeah, obviously I started building the Public Benefit Corporation last year. Now, everyone's talking about SaaS is dead. And I'm like, well, good thing my instinct was I'm not building a SaaS platform because everybody in responsible AI and AI safety has a SaaS platform. Like, and I saw this coming, and because the big
mhm,
thing is this field moves so quickly, companies are not willing to lock into a specific vendor because
mhm,
they worry that the tools of that vendor will be outdated as technology updates. Like I'm tool agnostic. So we've built out a way of doing at scale human in the loop testing, running evaluations, and also giving feedback. One thing I've been doing a lot is customized evaluations and customizing evaluation output. So what I mean by that is, as again, like I said, there's like the frontier labs world, and then
mhm.
there's everybody
Yeah.
else. In frontier labs world, MNLU and Simple Bench and all those benchmarks are amazing, and everyone just talks about them all the time. I have never had a single client outside of tech say that those benchmarks are helpful for them because it's not,
Mhm.
right? If you are an
Yeah.
auto manufacturer, some other person's definition of contextual is not yours. So I'm helping companies with doing testing and creating reusable assets. So all that is to
Mhm.
say, like the thing I'm trying to balance is context and scale.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm for these purposes, I agree with you. We should focus on the enterprise side. Those who are maybe doing some development, but really more deploying these foundation models and other tools. And the question I have there is, how well matured is this ecosystem of assessment, where if they understand that there's a set of issues they may have, whether it's bias or accuracy or whatever else, are we at the point where the tools are there and it's a matter of them just developing and implementing them, or is there still a lot of customization or a lot of figuring out how you can effectively assess?
Great question. It is an incredibly mature market. I've been calling it vibes-based evals, right? Like, we and, and I think most people listening to the show will know the difference, right? Generative AI introduced probabilistic output, not statistical output.
Yeah.
So pretty much roughly 3 years ago, we were thrown this brand new
Hmm.
problem for which none of the old tools
Hmm.
really worked. So we have been scrambling to do evaluations while figuring out how to do evaluations. And I would say we spent the first few years just scrambling behind the company saying,
Hmm.
hey, we're going to do these evaluations. There are things you've missed or things you're not focusing on. And now, not to say we have breathing room, but we can now take the time and say, okay, we also have to design better methods. So, it's immature in every sense of the term. Like,
Hmm.
one, we don't have the tools. Two, we don't have the methods. Three, we don't have the model access. Four, we don't have the legal protections.
Hmm.
Five, we don't have the institutions. And six, and maybe most importantly to me, which is why it started the nonprofit, is we
Hmm.
just don't have enough people doing this work. It's interesting. I testified to the state of New York on the need for evaluations and audits, et cetera. And some of the pushback from companies is that, oh, there isn't really enough of a need. And I think I am now on record saying, really, because I'm really tired and I need more people doing this work.
But it's great you're doing it. But I agree with you, and it's certainly the reason that people like me are working to not necessarily train professionals, but at least raise the overall ambient level of knowledge among people that we're sending out from a place like Wharton. Can we overcome some of those barriers though? So for example, in terms of the non-deterministic nature of these systems, is it fundamentally possible to understand things like bias and when we're in this environment where you don't necessarily know what's going to happen?
Yeah, we always like to use, the term in context has become
Hmm.
very, very popular. And
Hmm.
and that's always been the case, right? So we can create lots of guidance and rubrics and measurement tools,
Hmm.
but it is up to the evaluator to have to understand the context in which it's going to be used. And again, kind of why I'm often actually very excited to work with non-frontier labs. So frontier labs are making general tools and it's hard to like narrow down to a vertical. I love seeing the thing in action. So if
Hmm.
I'm working with, for example, an insurance client, they're specifically testing an insurance tool, and I know exactly who the stakeholders are, who the end user is, and what the situation is. Then I can craft, what the testing should be and what I should look out for, which is, very different from the task that the frontier labs have at hand, which is like think of every bad
Yeah.
situation ever in any setting of anybody. And I don't envy them that, but I do think then there's almost this handoff from and there needs to be again this like industry understanding. If there is a certain amount of work the frontier labs will do and actually can do, there's actually some work that they cannot do. So what the frontier labs cannot do is, again, for this insurance client, figure out, oh, hey, you're going to be using whatever Claude
Hmm.
in this insurance setting. We need to make sure as Anthropic that it's going to work. That I would not place that
Hmm.
as their responsibility. So, these things are very in-depth, they're very contextual. And the struggle that all of us have right now, everybody's grappling with, is again, like, how do we scale? How do we scale our testing, right?
Hmm.
There is this industry push. I don't think it's a bad push to integrate AI into all these different things. It really can improve efficiencies. Like, I've been using a lot of agents for all sorts of things, and I really like it. But then, how do we take this good work and not stifle it by not having good governance? And
Hmm.
you've probably heard me say this. I've said this a whole bunch of times. It's a fallacy that regulation stifles innovation. Every company I've ever worked with is actually looking for
Hmm.
guidance on what to do and how
Yeah.
to do it right. Otherwise, they're reinventing the wheel with every new project and every single time, and it's really not a helpful place to be.
But in this environment where, especially in the US, there's not a lot of regulation, what is it that motivates companies to do this investment, especially given that uncertainty you've talked about?
Yeah, and it's really just assurance, and the easiest definition of AI assurance is your AI model doing what
Mhm.
you've promised it's doing. So for them, it's a customer risk. What I've noticed for the past few years is that AI company, oh, sorry, a lot of enterprise AI rollout is internal. So they're using LLMs for back office processes, for internal stuff. And they're very, very wary to use anything customer facing. And this is a reliability and assurance problem. They're okay if the model says it does something wrong in the context of, reading some paperwork, they can absorb that liability. And there's probably very low liability because happening in the context of their workplace, but they will not put it in front of a customer because for them, again, like
Mhm.
their baby is their tool, their product, their service. AI, as long as AI can help advance that,
Mhm.
they're happy to use it. But if there is undue risk being introduced, they're not. And that's why we had seen very, very careful rollout. And I think last year everybody was talking about how, whatever, some very high percent of pilots never moved to scale. And that's really a lot of what it is. We don't have good ways of monitoring these systems at scale quite yet.
And I know you've also been looking at broader issues. You were part of a debate with Chris Hughes, who's actually doing a PhD in my department at Wharton, where
Really?
yes, where the two of you were arguing, as I understand it, against the proposition that there would be this tremendous AI job apocalypse. And so I'm curious your thoughts, because obviously this concern about AI completely disrupting labor markets is top of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah, yes. So that was an immensely fun debate. I really loved it. And actually, a couple of weeks later, I was up at MIT and I visited Professor Johnson's class,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was funny. I also showed up late, and I'm like, "Oh, this reminds me of undergrad." So he teaches this amazing class with Gary Gensler, who used to
Mm-hmm.
lead the SEC, and
Yep.
it's really about like AI and AI innovation. But yeah, and I think a lot of us were kind of making the same argument that it's not work is not a finite pie of things, and AI is not coming to eat more of the pie than we can eat. Right? It is an ever expanding set of tasks, and new technology creates new jobs and new tasks. The example I used to give is like, hey, remember in the 90s where there used to be this job called a web, and it was kind of one person who knew some HTML. And now you not only have entire web teams, you hire external firms for your branding and your photography and all this other work that you do. Again, 1998, if you had told somebody that one day this will be, a very significant expense your company spends and they hire dozens of people and external firms to do this, they would just kind of think it's funny. And that's really what I'm getting at. Some jobs
Mm-hmm.
are going to be automated away. And it is our responsibility from a policy perspective to ensure this is what Chris is arguing. I know Chris is working on this from a policy perspective
Mm-hmm.
to create the right kinds of safety nets for people, the right kinds of safeguards. And in particular, there are a couple of audiences that we have identified. And one in particular is young people graduating
Mm-hmm.
with degrees and entering the market. Why? Because AI does a level of work that does not require domain
Mm-hmm.
expertise. So my 2026 word of the year is discernment. A lot of people have been using critical thinking. Mine is actually discernment. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is like I use an AI agent to design a website. I have no design skills. That website looks amazing to me. If I showed it to a web design professional, I can guarantee you they would immediately point out little issues, problems, etc. Right? And we're all in those of us who have been in the job market, been in our
Mm-hmm.
professions for a bit,
Yep.
have that. We have that discernment
Yeah.
that, again, to the median person who does not have that expertise, the output of AI looks really interesting. It looks great. It looks wonderful. And maybe, I'm fine with my super generic AI agent produced website. But if I were trying to go for something more innovative, deeper, etc., I would still have to call a professional. Now, if we're not hiring young people into entry level jobs, we're going to have to do something to ensure that they're getting upskilled and able to be the next generation with that discernment. Because I am not planning on having my job in 40 years. I certainly hope that there will be other people who are better than me doing it,
Mm-hmm.
but who are those people and what are we doing to ensure that they're safely entering the job market?
So there's a piece of that, as you say, that's a policy question. But again, parallel what we were talking about before, now companies need to make their decisions about what to do in this environment, and they're under pressure to cut costs, and they've got these technologies. So how should these enterprises think about what to do in this environment? Whereas, as you suggest, if they just don't hire young people, then ultimately they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, yeah, and it's almost this like age old conversation about short term benefit and long
Mm-hmm.
term impact. And for the past few years, a lot of the AI in the workforce conversations started off with like AI literacy, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we ever very well defined. And it's like, oh, everyone needs to know how to use AI. Again, I'm not quite sure what that means, but sure. And then it became, hey, I mean, I have an AI policy, but my employees are still using AI for things, and it became a little bit more of a harder governance thing. Like we should not be taking sensitive company documents and dumping it into your version of Chat GPT and getting email outputs or whatever it is, right? And we did see shadow AI use.
Mhm,
Now the big question is in workforce integration. This is actually like I think it's a very exciting. It's
mm,
exciting for a few reasons. One is I think the job of good leadership is to mitigate any fears about AI replacing everybody. And that is not just your job as a leader, it is a smart, sensible, strategic decision to make because you should know how you want to roll out AI in your organization. And part of that is workforce integration. What do I mean by that?
mhm,
There's this great paper that just came out of MIT, Caosun and Aral and his grad student, and I loved it. I was there at the Big at MIT conference talking to Sinan, and I saw his grad student, Michael present. It's called the augmentation trap. I love that framing because basically what they're
mm,
saying is the short-term efficiency gains of putting an AI system to do work actually has the long-term impact of cognitive decline for the worker because they're not incentivized. Like they're
mhm,
sort of doing the cognitive offloading, they're just dumping it on the AI
yep,
system. So why is that bad? One is you're going to have a workforce that actually doesn't have discernment. People are going, that muscle will atrophy
mhm,
because you have to use your discernment skills to retain your discernment skills. Second is for new employees, they're calling it's cognitive debt. It's a muscle they've never
mhm,
built. Like for us, it would atrophy, but for them, it never existed. So that's an even worse case. So maybe in the short term, you're getting quote unquote cost efficiencies. In the long term, you have a workforce that does not know how to make a decision, or worse, does not know the difference between a good and a bad decision, right? And that's really when we talk of all the language about human in the loop,
mhm,
back to discernment, we need people who are able to tell if something was a good or a bad decision because an
mhm.
AI actually can give you input into it. But ultimately, it's humans that best understand the system and the environment.
Mhm. No, it's a fascinating problem, and it strikes me similar to what we're seeing in other areas. People like my colleague Hansa Bastani have done research on education, where
Hmm.
similar phenomenon. You give people students an LLM, they use it, they get higher scores. Then you take the LLM away, and they get lower
And they're
scores than the people who
crippled.
never used it. Right. So
Yep.
so
Yep.
how do we escape from that trap?
Yeah, I fell down. I'm doing some work on AI in education as well.
Mhm,
Last year, I presented to the California School Boards Association. And, one thing I had forgotten and was pleasantly reminded is that we've been studying education for decades and decades and decades,
mhm,
right? Lots of brilliant people have been statistically analyzing education. We have some of the best longitudinal data. So it was a field that was ready, right? They had the people, they had the
mhm,
means, they've done this before to test AI. One of the most important things that I learned, and this is about the pedagogy of AI, and not just for kids, but I think it's for all of us. We're
mhm,
all learning how to
yeah.
use AI. The difference is in your framing of what AI is for. So AI is often presented as a tool of production. And that is the shorthand, right? Use AI to write an essay, use AI to draft an email, use AI to make the slide look pretty. It is producing a thing. Instead, and that's actually the bad place. And this is where, like you said, you stick kids in front of an LLM and then they're just like, write me a 300-word essay about Romeo and Juliet. And they got it. And, but then if you ask them who is Romeo, they could not possibly tell you. And not just that, there is this deeper meaning of why we read these stories
Mhm,
and books. It's not just to torture us and, make us read Old English and write stupid essays. It's to learn how to communicate and explain things. And we've lost all of that when we think of AI as a tool of production. Now, instead, if we think of AI as a tool of mastery. So in education, it's often called the zone of proximal learning. So
mhm,
when kids are learning, they're going to the next stage. If we integrate, and this is about human AI configuration,
mm,
right? This is like the HCI crowd should be extremely excited about this, right?
mhm,
Because this is about how do we integrate this tool and how are people using it and how are they taught how to
mm,
use it? Again, this goes back to this idea of workforce integration, AI literacy, but like in the classroom. So AI as a tool of mastery means what are the ways in which they're using an AI to achieve the next level of achievement. What that requires from the teacher and from the person designing the curriculum is that, again, the point of writing a 300-word essay about Romeo and Juliet was not
yeah,
to write it. It was
yeah,
to, read this complex test, this complex text,
mhm,
atomize themes and viewpoints, string them all together, make a coherent argument. All of these things AI can help you do, but should not do for you.
mhm. There seems to be a challenge, though, in both of these domains, and I'm thinking back to the enterprise governance kinds of situation that we've been talking about. That the processes that are about, as you say, assurance. We've got this AI tool. You want it to do what it's supposed to do. We don't want it to fail in these different ways. We need to govern it and restrain it. That seems to me to be a different kind of process, and typically a different group of people than the ones who are going to look at these questions about integration, about how do we have that discernment about what are we using these tools for. So is there a way to bridge those gaps? Am I identifying a real problem?
Yeah, no, you are, and I think it goes back to what we've been talking about with use of really any technologies. It
Yeah.
has to be solving a real problem. A lot of the AI hype was just excitement around the tool and its existence,
Mhm.
and not so much an assessment of whether or not it's useful. I do like to think that the hype is dying down a bit in kind of a positive way. I think a lot of people have gotten very smart about AI. It's actually quite easy to learn. How to integrate with large language models, how to use them, and specifically agentic AI, like every user journey becomes more and more natural.
Mhm.
So and I'll give you a slightly spicy take. I was not particularly, not that I wasn't excited. I mean, I actually wasn't particularly excited about LLMs. I mean,
Mhm.
Gen AI was like a cool
Yeah.
achievement.
Yeah.
I didn't really see, I'm like, this is not revolutionizing the workforce because it's this like call and response thing.
Mhm.
Agentic AI, however,
Mhm.
for me, has been like, I did not use Gen AI stuff for anything. I didn't use LLMs for anything. With agentic
Yep.
AI, I'm doing lots of stuff.
Yep.
And again, it's because I didn't want to replace my discernment. I'm like, no, the output of this is very, very superficial and nothing I would ever say. But the things that agentic AI can do, and this is where it becomes very powerful, like all the different connectors, you can ask it to do certain tasks for you. Again, I still have to be the one at the end of it with the discernment and,
Yeah.
giving it feedback. Like for anybody who's a builder, it's a very, very exciting time. I kind of feel like I did as, in high school when I first started learning about the internet and all the things you could
Yeah.
do with it. It kind of has that same vibe. So to your point, in terms of solving a problem, you have much more tools at your disposal, and I hope that there's a lot less hype around the capabilities of these tools and we just see them as technological artifacts
Mm.
and things we piece together.
But let's get real. There's a lot of hype around these tools, right? And more capabilities of agentic AI, even more. I guess what I'm wondering is,
Yeah.
you're right. It's surprisingly easy to most people to figure out how to use it, at least for some things. But as you say, the
Mhm.
discernment is not, can I build a website? Because now
Yeah.
I can. The discernment
Mhm.
is, should I build a website, or when can my simple website do what I need, or when do I still need
Mhm.
the human? So I guess I come back to how do we get to that point in this era?
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of hype. I think the
Yeah.
hype kind of goes both ways. There's a lot of AI safety hype, or like crita hype is one term I had
Yeah.
heard. And then there's like, sort of the accelerationist
Hmm.
hype as well. I'd like, what is the way around it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I think for anybody who's new to the technology, you're being bombarded with frankly misinformation often,
Hmm.
of what these systems can do. A lot of it's very orchestrated, it's very staged. Even capabilities testing is designed in these ideal world
Hmm.
scenarios. So back to that open to debate thing that we were doing, in my like intro, I said something like, anybody who thinks AI is coming tomorrow to replace our jobs has never tried sharing a SharePoint file outside of their organization, and like like the room just like broke out. Because and it's like, and it's dumb, but it's true. Like this
Yeah.
is what AI integration means. It means your databases have to be connected, and it's all the work that like no one says they want to do. Everyone wants to do the cool, exciting work of like the prototype building. But wow, is scaling and
Mhm.
integrating and having all the hardness and security done right and done well the ultimate beast. So, there is a lot of hype. Yes, that hype doesn't translate to anything once you're trying to do something at scale. And again, this is another split between Silicon Valley and everybody else. And
Mhm.
in Silicon Valley, there's lots of bold proclamation about AI replacing,
Mhm.
workers. And in literally every case, it has either been rolled back quietly or not so quietly. Or, in the case of, let's say, like Block and Jack Dorsey, a lot of people pointed out that I don't think this was AI. I think this
Yeah.
was a series of bad business decisions plus a Bitcoin tumbling, sir, and
Right.
not really AI. It's easier to hide behind that and sound like a good business leader than we made some bad decisions on hiring and product design last quarter or
Mhm.
last year. But yeah, I'm not seeing as much of that hype in the non-tech
Mhm.
sector. There is enthusiasm, there is
Yeah.
interest, but I think people are quite wise to it.
And lastly, I want to ask you about. I know that you're working on a book and a podcast, even more broadly on the nature of thinking. So it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my podcast launches next week if I get my act together and get everything posted, etc. And I did use an AI agent to make the website for that. It did a really good job, I think, from my naive perspective. That's why I was using that example. It did thinking about thinking. There's also a companion Substack, and it's about intelligence as a social, political, scientific, and economic construct. So, just taking a step back, a lot of the fear about AI taking jobs or making us dumb or whatever it is, right? A lot of the cognition and economic based fears are actually rooted in this idea of intelligence, the measurement of intelligence.
Mhm.
So I went back and said, okay, well, where does this idea of intelligence even come from?
Mhm.
So, we use these terms like superhuman AI. These benchmarks of intelligence were something that we as humans fabricated. We fabricated them in the first industrial revolution because at that time we had to assess people for their ability to tally numbers and
Mhm.
remember lists and have correspondence and act in a workforce, wake up on time, get to things that today will automate with AI. We don't need to tally numbers. We have our calculators and our AI systems for that. We don't need to do a lot of these tasks. So I argue that notion of intelligence is actually antiquated because it's built for
Mhm.
the industrial revolution that we have now automated away. We're increasingly automating away.
Mhm.
Great. So then what? So that does not give me fear about humankind. What that tells me is that we have an imperfect measurement. So
Mhm.
how do we then arrive at a better and different measurement? And one of the main things I talk about it are other fields of science and how they evaluate intelligence, right? Mycelial intelligence, insect intelligence, even extraterrestrial intelligence.
Mhm.
The biggest mistake we made was we indexed artificial intelligence on humans. There's really no need to do that. And I'm not necessarily arguing for a new form of machine intelligence or whatever. What I'm saying is our measurement of human intelligence just needs to be recalibrated. So the book explores that.
Mhm.
The podcast is a little bit different in its setup. It's really not an interview based podcast. It was actually just a recorded seminar that I
Mhm.
did at Harvard. And I purposely gathered, from the Harvard community, people in bioethics, education, law, computer science, policy, so a wide range of really, really smart people. And, we had just weekly discussions and we just
Mhm.
live recorded them. So it's kind of it's a bit of a masterclass and kind of a very
Mhm.
different idea for a podcast. And maybe people will love it or maybe they'll hate it. They'll think it's very confusing when 10 people are all talking. I personally think it's really fascinating because I learned a lot from the students in the class, right?
Mhm.
I'm not a bioethicist. So learning about how, they think about animal intelligence
Mhm.
and the rights that animals get as a function of that intelligence from a bioethical perspective is very, very different from any world that I would ever be in, right? So it's like I said, coming out next week if I get my act together.
For people who are listening to this, who are interested in these topics more broadly, any other advice to where they should look, either to better understand the more immediate practical issues about in organizations how to appropriately manage AI, or to think more coherently about these broader questions of workforce integration and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, first, I'm always happy to talk to folks. My website is just my name, so that's easy enough. And I'm on really my only social media at this point, kind of is LinkedIn, but I'm not really that great at that. I would very closely follow a lot of the legislation that's going on.
Mhm.
And while I do agree that at the federal level, there's a lot of pushback on it, on regulation on around AI, it is interesting to kind of follow the narratives in certain states, Illinois, California, Virginia, and then to follow certain fields in which we're seeing it pop up most. And a lot of it's, like education and thinking about, and it's sort of corollary is sort of online child safety or, like safety for kids with AI systems. Those are things that I personally would keep an eye on, and I don't think that we're going to have any hard and heavy regulation in the very, very near future. but I am optimistic about, independent bodies, verification becoming very,
Mhm.
very important. And what does that, but the nuts and bolts of what that means and what that entails.
Absolutely. Rumman, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school, sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program, featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.